Throughout this semester, we studied a lot about the changes that we undergo as emerging adults from adolescence, but we finally got to understand the cognitions behind it and the reasonings, more like the biological side of why these things are happening. I'm also a psych major, so this is kind of like my area of expertise, so it was really interesting to see how my background and my major connected to a lot of these concepts and themes that we've been learning throughout the whole semester.
Let's start off by reviewing some brain anatomy. So the frontal lobe is responsible for motor control, problem solving, and speech production. The temporal lobe is responsible for auditory processing, language comprehension, and memory and information retrieval. The brainstem is responsible for involuntary responses, and then the cerebellum is responsible for balance and coordination. The occipital lobe is responsible for sight, and it contains the visual cortex, and is responsible for visual reception and visual interpretation. The parietal lobe is responsible for touch perception, body orientation, and sensory discrimination. We'll be focusing on the frontal lobe, which is responsible for problem solving and motor control, which, as you can imagine, is very important during emerging adulthood in helping us make decisions.
So the reading that I chose to focus on for this vlog was reading Emerging Adulthood, Brain Development by Bradley Thomas and Corley Paris Edgar. So this reading really struck me because it talked about the biological changes that undergo in our brain during emerging adulthood and how that ties into emerging adulthood and our experiences. So one of the main factors that contributes to our maturing process during emerging adulthood is the development of the prefrontal cortex. So prior to our mid-20s, our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet, meaning that we're not very good at decision making quite yet, and that affects our regulatory systems and also execution of movements and actions. So in the reading Emerging Adulthood, Brain Development, the authors discuss how during the transition from adolescence to emerging adulthood, we shift from limbic functioning, which is responsible for affective and motivational functions, to frontal systems, so executive and regulatory systems, meaning that we shift towards more goal-directed behavior instead of partaking in risky behavior that's characterized in adolescence. This change is also due to being in a brand new environment and personal development. So this is a perfect example is being in college. I feel like maybe, at least for me, my personal experience was that my first 2 years, I would say I would engage in more risky behavior. Not terrible things, but I guess because also the environment was new, I guess I would engage more in like drinking and partying with friends, and I would even probably like some nights rather go out to a party with friends rather than studying and doing work like I was supposed to, and then that was reflected in my grades as well. And then probably my junior year, I realized that wasn't the smartest idea and how I really needed to focus more on my future and the goals that I wanted in the future. And I realized that that wasn't the right way of doing things, so I took a step back, and I would say I've definitely matured from my first 2 years of college. Now I do tend to focus more things on in the long-term perspective, so I take things into perspective and think, no, that's probably not the best option. I should probably stay home and study or do work or catch up on work rather than going out when social experience isn't worth really something that could affect my future long term and affect my grades for grad school or my chances of getting a job. So I do definitely think that for me, personally, in this experience, talking about this in terms of the reading, I can really relate to changing from probably this risky behavior that was kind of characterized by adolescence, from being in a new environment and having all this freedom, to kind of really personalizing or personally developing these kind of ways of taking back and really reflecting on how this could really affect my future and focus more on goals for the long-term run. One of the main concerns is that during adolescence or during even early emerging adulthood, that is discussed in this article, is that alcohol and drug consumption can heavily impact our prefrontal cortex development. So our prefrontal cortex is responsible for moderating social behavior, decision making, and even personality development. So you can see how crucial our prefrontal cortex is during emerging adulthood.
I had a fun time reading about how the prefrontal cortex has impacted my emerging adulthood experience, just because I'm a psych major, so it sounds so fun to see how this can relate more to my personal life and how it connects to other emerging adulthood experiences. Thank you for watching.